The Hollow Echo, a Detective Sherman investigation disclaimer. The following content contains sensitive material and is suitable only for viewers 18 years and older. All names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. This account is based on a real unsolved case, but has been modified for privacy and legal considerations. The views expressed are solely those of the narrator and do not reflect the official position of any law enforcement agency. Introduction. The day I received the Holloway case file, rain pounded against my office window like an impatient messenger. I'm Detective Sherman, and for 27 years I've specialized in the cases others have abandoned, the cold ones that haunt precinct filing cabinets and family photo albums alike. There's something about an unsolved mystery that burrows deep into my consciousness and refuses to let go until I've extracted every possible truth. This particular case had remained unsolved for nearly a decade. A prominent businessman found dead in his locked study with no signs of forced entry, no murder weapon, and 6 potential suspects, each with their own labyrinth of motives. The original investigators had followed every conventional lead to its inevitable dead end. The case had slowly faded from public memory, becoming just another forgotten headline in a world that moves too quickly to remember its own tragedies. But some deaths refuse to remain silent. They echo through time, demanding justice with a persistence that only the truly wronged can maintain. The Holloway case was one such persistent echo, and it had found its way to my desk through a series of coincidences too perfect to be accidental. As I spread the crime scene photos across my desk that rainy afternoon, I couldn't have known how deeply this case would pull me into its orbit, or how it would force me to question everything I thought I understood about human nature. The truth, as I would discover, wasn't just elusive, was actively hiding behind layers of deception so carefully constructed that dismantling them would require me to become as much a psychologist as a detective. What makes someone commit the ultimate act of violence against another human being? Is it always born from hatred, or can it emerge from something that once resembled love? And when faced with the perfect opportunity to get away with murder, what stops some people while others cross that irrevocable line? These are the questions that have defined my career, and they were about to be tested in ways I couldn't have anticipated. So settle in as I take you through one of the most psychologically complex cases I've ever encountered, a case where nothing was as it initially appeared, and where the truth, when finally revealed, would challenge everything I believed about justice. The case begins. Let me take you back to Oak Ridge Heights, an affluent neighborhood where old money whispers through tall oak trees and where secrets hide behind perfectly manicured hedges. It was here, 10 years ago, that Victor Holloway was found dead in his study, the door locked from the inside, a single gunshot wound to his chest. Victor was a man who had accumulated as many enemies as he had millions. A real estate developer with a reputation for ruthlessness in business and charm in social settings. He was the kind of man who made you feel special in his presence while simultaneously calculating your value to his ambitions. He lived in a sprawling colonial-style mansion with his second wife, Elise, 30 years his juniora former gallery assistant he'd met while purchasing art for one of his hotels. "I've reviewed your file," I said to Lieutenant Cassidy, who had worked the original case and had reluctantly agreed to meet me at a diner halfway between our jurisdictions. "But I want to hear it from you. What made this case go cold?" Cassidy stirred his coffee absently, the spoon clinking against ceramic in a rhythm that matched the rain outside. "Too many suspects, too many theories, not enough evidence," he said finally. The medical examiner placed time of death between 7 and 9 p.m. All 6 people present in the house that night had motive, opportunity, and no solid alibi, and everyone had a different story about what happened. "The locked room is what interests me," I said, flipping through my notes. "Door locked from the inside, key still in the lock, windows secure. No secret passages or hidden entrances according to the forensic team." How does someone commit murder in a locked room and vanish? Cassidy shrugged. That's why some of the team thought suicide. But you didn't. The angle was wrong for suicide. And there was no gunshot residue on Holloway's hands. Besides, the man had just closed a major deal. He wasn't suicidal. He was celebrating. I nodded, making a note. Tell me about the 6 suspects. First, the wife, Elise Holloway, 32 at the time of his death. She stood to inherit most of his fortune, which she did. She claimed to be in the kitchen preparing dinner with the housekeeper when the shot was fired. The housekeeper being Martha Jensen, 67. Been with the family for 20 years. Backed up Elise's alibi, but they were alone together, so he let the implication hang. Next, Victor's son from his first marriage, Daniel Holloway, 39, finance executive. Bad blood between him and his father, especially after Victor remarried someone younger than Daniel's own wife. Daniel claimed to be in the library alone, reading. No one to verify that. Exactly. Then there's Catherine Voss, Victor's sister. She was visiting that weekend, supposedly to reconcile after a business disagreement. She claimed to be upstairs in her guest room, taking a nap, also unverified. Cassidy nodded. The 5th person was Jeffrey Winters, Victor's business partner. They just closed a major deal, but rumors suggested Jeffrey was being pushed out of the company. He said he was in the garden, taking a phone call, but phone records were inconclusive. And the 6th? Olivia Winters, Jeffrey's wife. She and Victor apparently had a brief affair years earlier, which Jeffrey had recently discovered. She claimed to be in the sunroom, but it was adjacent to Victor's study. She would have been closest to the scene when it happened. I sat back, processing the information. 6 people, all with reasons to want Victor dead, all with unclear alibis, and a seemingly impossible crime scene. What about the murder weapon? That's another problem. Never found it. A 38 caliber bullet killed him, but no gun on the premises matched. Searched the entire property, dragged the pond, checked the septic system, nothing. I tapped my pen against my notepad. 10 years is a long time. Why reopen this now? Cassidy leaned forward, because someone sent an anonymous letter to the department last month, claiming they knew who killed Victor Holloway and how they did it. Normally, we'd dismiss it as a crank, but he pulled an evidence bag from his pocket and slid it across the table. Inside was a small brass key. This was included with the letter. It's the spare key to Victor's study, the one that went missing the day he died. Revisiting the scene. Have you ever walked into a room where something terrible happened years ago? There's an almost tangible heaviness to the air, as if the walls themselves absorb the emotional impact of what transpired, and now slowly release it back into the atmosphere. That's how it felt when I stepped into Victor Holloway's study 10 years after his death. The house had remained in Elise Holloway's possession all this time, though, according to my research, she rarely stayed there, preferring her apartment in the city or her house in the Hamptons. The study had been preserved, not out of any sentimental attachment, she assured me, but because she simply hadn't gotten around to redecorating. I'm grateful for your cooperation, Mrs. Holloway, I said as she led me into the wood-paneled room. I know reopening old wounds can't be pleasant. Elise Holloway was now in her early 40s, but could have easily passed for 35. She carried herself with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being observed. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her designer outfit suggested both wealth and restraint. It's Ms. Winters now, she corrected mildly. I remarried 3 years ago. I nodded, making a mental note. To Jeffrey Winters? Your late husband's business partner? A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Yes. Is that relevant to your investigation, Detective Shernan? Everything is potentially relevant at this stage, I replied, turning my attention to the study. It was a handsome room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, and a massive oak desk positioned to face the door. The carpet, not original, I presumed was a rich burgundy that would have effectively hidden bloodstains. The room had 1 door and 2 windows, both with their original locks intact. The door was locked from the inside when he was found? I asked, examining the heavy brass lock and key. Yes, Martha and I heard the gunshot. Everyone came running. We called through the door, but there was no answer. Jeffrey and Daniel eventually broke it down. I crouched by the door, running my fingers along the frame. They broke it down, yet the lock was repaired rather than replaced? Elise shrugged. Victor was particular about maintaining the original features of the house, after everything. I suppose I continued that tradition. Moving to the windows, I tested each one. Both locked securely from the inside, and both overlooked a sheer drop to a stone patio below. No easy access there. Where exactly was Victor's body found? Elise pointed to a spot in front of the desk. There, fallen backward. The medical examiner said he was standing when he was shot. Facing the door? Yes. As if he was confronting someone who had just entered? A slight hesitation, I suppose. I moved to stand where Victor would have been, looking toward the door. From this position, he would have seen anyone entering. Was anything missing from the room afterward? Anything out of place? Not that I recall. The police asked the same questions. And no sign of the weapon? None. They searched everywhere. I walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, taking in details. There was a stone fireplace on the wall opposite the desk, currently cold and empty. Above it hung a large portrait of Victor Halawaya, commanding presence even in death, his piercing blue eyes following me as I moved. This portrait was it here that night? Elise looked surprised by the question. Yes, it was commissioned for his 50th birthday, 2 years before he died. I nodded, continuing my circuit of the room. On a side table near one of the leather armchairs sat a crystal decanter and a set of matching tumblers on a silver tray. Did Victor drink the evening he died? He usually had a scotch in his study before dinner. It was his ritual. I made another note. And the others in the house that night, Daniel, Catherine, Jeffrey, and Olivia, are any of them still in contact with you? Elise's posture stiffened slightly. Jeffrey, obviously. Catherine calls on holidays. Daniel and I are civil but distant. Olivia and I, well, it's complicated now that I'm married to her ex-husband. I'd like to speak with all of them. I'm sure you would, Detective, but I can't guarantee their cooperation. That night changed everyone, some more than others. I turned back to face her directly. Ms. Winters, may I ask why you stayed in a house where your husband was murdered? Her expression remained composed, but I caught a flicker of something in her eye, anger perhaps, or pain. I didn't stay. As I mentioned, I rarely come here. But selling seemed disrespectful somehow. Victor built this house. It was his pride and joy. And despite what people assumed about our marriage, I did care for him. One last question for now, I said, pulling the evidence bag containing the mysterious key from my pocket. Do you recognize this? Elise took the bag, studying the small brass key inside. Her composure wavered momentarily before she handed it back. It looks like the spare key to this room. Victor kept it in his bedroom safe. After he died, the police asked about it. I assumed it was lost, and now it's found its way back, along with a letter claiming to know who killed your husband and how they did it. Any thoughts on who might have sent it? Elise crossed her arms, her gaze drifting to the portrait above the fireplace. Detective Shernan. In the years after Victor's death, I received dozens of letters from people claiming to know what happened. Psychics, amateur sleuths, journalists, looking for a story. None of them knew anything. But none of them had the key, I pointed out. True. She met my eyes directly. If I were to guess, I'd say someone is playing a cruel game. Someone who enjoys watching us relive the worst night of our lives. Or, I suggested quietly, someone with a conscience that's finally caught up with them. The interviews begin. I always pay attention to environments when interviewing potential suspects or witnesses. Where someone chooses to meet can tell you as much about them as what they say. Daniel Holloway chose the downtown office of his investment firm, a power move that put me on his turf, surrounded by the trappings of his success. The corner office on the 42nd floor offered a panoramic view of the city, the furniture sleek and minimalist, designed to impress rather than comfort. Daniel himself matched his surroundings. Precisely tailored suit, meticulously groomed salt and pepper hair, an expensive watch that he glanced at repeatedly to remind me his time was valuable. "I appreciate you seeing me, Mr. Holloway," I began, settling into the chair across from his imposing glass desk. "I'm not sure why we're reopening this after 10 years, he replied, not bothering with pleasantries. The police investigation was thorough at the time, and yet no resolution was reached. I opened my notebook. Sometimes a fresh perspective can reveal new patterns in old evidence. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to assessing risks and opportunities. At 49, he had the confident bearing of a man who had emerged from his father's shadow to create his own legacy. "What would you like to know, Detective? Let's start with your relationship with your father at the time of his death." A tight smile, complicated, as I'm sure you've already heard. My father was a difficult man, brilliant in business, but challenging in personal relationships. You were upset about his marriage to Elise. Upset? No. Concerned, perhaps. She was younger than me, barely out of college when they met. It seemed predatory on his part. Yet you attended dinner at their house the night he died. Daniel's fingers drummed once on the glass surface of his desk. Family obligation. My father had just closed a major deal. He wanted to celebrate with family and close associates. In his mind, showing up for the photo opportunity was more important than whether we actually got along. "Can you walk me through your movements that evening?" He sighed, the sound of someone who had rehearsed this narrative countless times. Arrived around 6. Had drinks in the living room with everyone. Around 7, I excused myself to the library to make a few work calls and review some documents. I was there when I heard the gunshot around 8:15. Alone in the library? No one can verify your whereabouts during that time? As I told the original investigators, no, everyone was scattered throughout that mausoleum of a house. I made a note, then changed direction. The inheritance, you received your father's shares in the family business, correct? Yes. Approximately 30% of his estate went to me, the rest primarily to Elise, with some charitable donations. Were you satisfied with that arrangement? Daniel's expression hardened. I had my own money by then, Detective. I wasn't dependent on my father's goodwill. That's not what I asked. He held my gaze for a moment before responding. No one gets everything they want in life, Detective Shernan. I accepted the terms of my father's will because I had no choice. But if you're asking if I killed him over money, the answer is no. I nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting his statement. One more question about that night. After the gunshot, when everyone gathered outside your father's study, what was your impression of the others' reactions? This seemed to catch him off guard. Their reactions? Yes. In your observation, did anyone seem less surprised or shocked than they should have been? Daniel considered this, genuinely thoughtful for the first time in our conversation. Jeffrey was calm, too calm, perhaps, but that was his nature in crisis situations. Elise was hysterical, but he paused. But it felt performed somehow, like she was playing the role of grieving widow rather than actually experiencing it. Of course, people react differently to shock. And Catherine? Olivia? Catherine was. Catherine. Controlled, analytical. She took charge of calling the police while Jeffrey and I broke down the door. Olivia was quiet, almost detached. She stood apart from everyone else. I made several notes, then asked, "Have you had contact with any of them in recent years?" I see Catherine occasionally, family matters. Jeffrey and I have some overlapping business interests, though I avoid him when possible. Elise, rarely, and only when necessary for legal matters regarding my father's estate. And Olivia Winters? Something flickered across Daniel's face, discomfort, perhaps. No. I haven't seen Olivia since she and Jeffrey divorced about 5 years ago. Were you aware that Elise is now married to Jeffrey Winters? Yes. His tone was neutral, but his jaw tightened slightly. Business and pleasure always blurred for those two, even when my father was alive. I closed my notebook and stood. Thank you for your time, Mr. Holloway. I may have additional questions as the investigation progresses. As I reached the door, Daniel called after me. Detective, there's something you should know about my father. I turned back. Yes, he wasn't just feared in business. He knew things about people's secrets they didn't want revealed. Every person in that house that night had something to hide, something my father could have exposed if it suited him, including you. Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes, especially me. Catherine Voss chose to meet me in the botanical garden near her downtown apartment neutral ground, with the added benefit of privacy among the sprawling plant displays. At 72, she moved with the rigidity of someone who had spent decades refusing to bend, either physically or metaphorically. Unlike her nephew Daniel, who projected carefully crafted success, Catherine wore her prosperity with the casual confidence of old money. No designer labels or obvious displays of wealth-just quality clothing, and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had never worried about paying bills. I appreciate you agreeing to speak with me, Ms. Bay. Voss, I said as we settled onto a bench surrounded by exotic flowering plants, the humid air heavy with their scent. I understand you're investigating Victor's death, she replied, her voice precise, her posture perfect. Though I can't imagine what new evidence could have emerged after a decade, I showed her the evidence bag containing the key. This was sent anonymously to the police department last month, along with a letter claiming knowledge of who killed your brother and how they did it. Catherine studied the key without touching the bag, her expression giving nothing away. And this is the missing study key? How fascinating. Did you know of its existence before now? Of course. Victor was obsessive about security. He kept a spare key to every room in that house. Where did he keep the spares? In his bedroom safe, as I recall. I saw him access it once when the original key to his study was temporarily misplaced. I made a note. Can you tell me about your relationship with your brother at the time of his death? Catherine adjusted the silk scarf at her neck, a gesture that seemed more about gaining time to consider her answer than any physical discomfort. Victor and I had our differences, particularly regarding the family business. Our father left us equal shares, but Victor had gradually acquired more controlling interest over the years. I felt he was taking the company in a direction our father wouldn't have approved. Was that the disagreement you were attempting to reconcile during your visit that weekend? A thin smile. You've done your homework, detective. Yes, that was part of it. Victor had recently purchased a significant property that I believed was overvalued. I questioned his judgment, which he didn't appreciate. Yet you accepted his dinner invitation. He was still my brother. Family disputes may be bitter, but they rarely sever the connection entirely. Please walk me through your movements that evening. Catherine recounted the events with methodical precision. Arrival at 6, drinks in the living room until about 7, then retiring to her guest room to rest before dinner, as she had a migraine developing. I was alone in my room when I heard the gunshot, she concluded. I came downstairs immediately and found everyone gathering outside Victor's study. Did you hear anything unusual before the gunshot? Voices, arguments, anything out of place? She considered this. No, the house is quite large, and my room was on the opposite wing from Victor's study. I shifted tactics slightly. After your brother's death, there was a significant change in the company leadership. Jeffrey Winters took over as CEO, and several of your brother's initiatives were abandoned. Did that benefit you financially? Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real emotion she'd displayed. If you're suggesting I murdered my brother for business advantages, detective, you're barking up the wrong tree. Yes, the company took a direction more aligned with my vision after Victor's death, but I could have achieved the same result through patience. Victor was making enemies quickly. His approach wasn't sustainable. What can you tell me about the relationships between the others in the house that night? Any tensions you observed? Catherine tapped her finger thoughtfully against the bench. Daniel resented Elise, of course too young, too calculating in his view. Jeffrey and Victor presented as partners and friends, but there was always competition there. Olivia, she paused. Olivia was uncomfortable around Victor. There was history there that created tension. What kind of history? I believe they had a brief affair years earlier when Olivia first met Jeffrey. Victor always had a weakness for beautiful, vulnerable women. And Olivia was certainly that when she was younger. Did Jeffrey know about this affair? At the time of Victor's death, I'm not certain. There were rumors, but whether Jeffrey had confirmed them, she shrugged elegantly. Men can be remarkably selective about what they choose to see when it comes to their wives and business partners. One final question, I said. The locked room. Do you have any theory about how someone could have killed Victor in a locked room and then disappeared? Catherine studied me for a long moment. Detective Shernan, my brother, was an arrogant man who believed himself invulnerable. Such men often create the circumstances of their own destruction without recognizing the danger until it's too late. That's not really an answer to my question. She rose gracefully from the bench. It's the only answer I have. Victor's death was a tragedy for our family, but perhaps an inevitable one given the way he lived his life. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another appointment. As she walked away, I remained seated, reviewing my notes. Catherine Voss had provided information while revealing almost nothing about herself, a skill likely honed through decades of navigating business and social waters where showing vulnerability was a disadvantage. 2 interviews and already contradictory impressions were emerging. Was Victor Holloway a calculating predator as Daniel suggested, or an arrogant but ultimately self-destructive man as Catherine portrayed him? And more importantly, which version might have gotten him killed? Deepening mystery. The exclusive country club where Jeffrey Winters suggested we meet spoke volumes about his priorities. Not the most private location for discussing murder, but one that established his social standing. At 64, Jeffrey carried himself with the deliberate control of a man accustomed to being deferred to. His golf attire was casual but expensive, his handshake firm but brief. "I've got a tea time in an hour," he informed me as we settled at a corner table on the club's veranda overlooking manicured greens. "But I'm happy to help with your investigation before then." "I appreciate that," I replied, studying him. Jeffrey had aged well in the decade since Victor's death, successful, fit, and now married to his late business partner's widow. Life had apparently treated him kindly in the aftermath of tragedy. "Let me be direct, Mr. Winters. You had perhaps the most to gain from Victor Holloway's death. You took control of the company, expanded it significantly, and eventually married his widow. Some might find that suspicious. Jeffrey didn't flinch. Some might, Detective. But timing doesn't equal causation. I married Elise 7 years after Victor died. As for the business, yes, I took control. Someone had to. The company employed hundreds of people who depended on decisive leadership during a crisis. Tell me about your relationship with Victor before his death. Professional, primarily. We'd been partners for 15 years. We didn't always agree on strategy, but we respected each other's expertise. No personal friendship? Jeffrey hesitated. Victor didn't have friends in the conventional sense. He had allies, associates, people he could use. I was probably the closest thing to a friend he had, which says more about his isolation than our relationship. Yet you were at his home celebrating the night he died, a business success that benefited us both. The Gateway Project was the largest development deal in the company's history. The celebration was perfunctory, brief acknowledgement before moving on to the next conquest. That was Victor's way. I switched angles. Your alibi that night was that you were in the garden taking a phone call when the shot was fired. Phone records didn't show any calls during that time frame. Jeffrey's expression tightened slightly. As I explained to the original investigators, I stepped outside because I was expecting an important call that never came. I was checking my emails and messages while waiting. When I heard the commotion inside, I returned immediately. So no one can verify your whereabouts at the time of the shooting. No. Like everyone else in that house, I was alone. I pulled out the evidence bag with the key. Do you recognize this? Jeffrey examined it without touching the bag. It looks like a key to Victor's study. Is this new evidence? It's the missing spare key that wasn't found during the original investigation. It was sent anonymously to the police department last month. His eyebrows rose. Interesting. Who sent it? That's what I'm trying to determine. The sender claimed to know who killed Victor and how they did it. Jeffrey leaned back, processing this information. A decade later, why wait so long? Guilt manifests in different time frames for different people, I suggested. Sometimes it takes years for conscience to overcome self-preservation. His gaze sharpened. That sounds like speculation rather than detection, Detective Shernan. I smiled slightly. The best detection often includes understanding human psychology. Speaking of which, were you aware of your first wife's history with Victor before his death? The question landed like a stone dropped in still water, ripples of tension spreading across Jeffrey's composed features. If you're referring to rumors about an affair, yes, I heard the whispers. Victor had a reputation with women, and Olivia was susceptible to attention when we were first married. Did you confront either of them about it? No. It was ancient history by the time I heard the rumors. Dredging it up would have served no purpose other than to create unnecessary drama. Yet you divorced Olivia 5 years after Victor's death. Jeffrey's jaw tightened. Our divorce had nothing to do with Victor or any rumors about their relationship. Sometimes marriages simply run their course. I made a note, then shifted direction again. After the gunshot was heard, you and Daniel broke down the study door. What exactly did you see when you entered the room? Jeffrey described the scene with detached precision. Victor on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, the room undisturbed, windows locked, no sign of a struggle or forced entry. And your impression of how the others reacted? He considered this. Daniel was shocked but controlled. Catherine took charge of practical matter-scalding police, keeping the housekeeper calm. Elise was distraught. Olivia seemed distant, almost as if she couldn't process what was happening. Did anyone's reaction strike you as false or rehearsed? Jeffrey met my gaze squarely. Detective, everyone reacts differently to sudden death. What might seem like inappropriate calm or excessive emotion to one person could be a natural response for another. I'm not qualified to judge the authenticity of anyone's grief or shock in that moment. A diplomatic non-answer. I pressed on. One last question. The original investigation concluded that it was impossible for someone to kill Victor in a locked room and then vanish. Do you have any theory about how it might have been accomplished? Jeffrey checked his watch, a not subtle reminder of his impending tea time before responding. No. It seemed impossible then, and it seems impossible now, which is why some of us wondered if it might have been suicide, despite the evidence indicating otherwise. You think Victor Holloway killed himself? I think a man like Victor, who controlled every aspect of his life, might choose to control his death as well and stage it in a way that would leave a lingering mystery. It would appeal to his sense of drama. I stood, gathering my notes. Thank you for your time, Mr. Winters. I may need to speak with you again as the investigation continues. He rose as well, extending his hand. Of course, I want resolution as much as anyone. Living under a cloud of suspicion for 10 years has been challenging. As we shook hands, I added, I'll be speaking with your ex-wife as well. Something flickered in his eyes' concern, perhaps, or warning. Olivia has had a difficult decade, Detective. Whatever you may think of the rest of us, she was the most innocent party in that house that night. Please remember that. It was an unexpected moment of protection toward an ex-wife, and I filed it away as yet another complexity in the tangled relationships surrounding Victor Holloway's death. Olivia Winters chose to meet me in a small coffee shop in a working-class neighborhood far from the upscale environments preferred by the other suspects. At 58, she had none of the obvious trappings of wealth that marked the others. Her clothing was simple, her only jewelry, a pair of small pearl earrings. There was a quietness about her that suggested someone accustomed to being overlooked. "Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Winters," I began after we'd ordered coffee. "It's Ms. Reynolds now," she corrected gently. I went back to my maiden name after the divorce. I nodded, making the correction in my notes. "I appreciate your willingness to discuss the events surrounding Victor Holloway's death after all this time." "I'm not sure how much help I'll be," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "The police questioned me extensively at the time. Sometimes details emerge with distance and perspective," I said. "Can you tell me about your relationship with Victor Holloway?" Olivia cradled her coffee cup between her hands, studying the surface of the liquid rather than meeting my eyes. I knew him primarily as my husband's business partner. Our interactions were mainly at company functions and occasional social gatherings. "Were you comfortable around him?" A slight hesitation. "Not particularly. Victor had an intense personality that some found charming, but that I found intimidating. There were rumors of a past relationship between you and Victor, before or early in your marriage to Jeffrey. I kept my tone neutral, observational rather than accusatory." Olivia's fingers tightened around her cup, knuckles whitening briefly before she consciously relaxed them. "There was a brief involvement," she acknowledged quietly. "When Jeffrey and I were first dating, not yet engaged, Victor pursued me aggressively. I was young, flattered by the attention. It ended quickly once I recognized the kind of man he was. Did Jeffrey know about this? Not at the time. I believe he found out years later, after we were married. We never discussed it directly, but you were present at Victor's house the night he died. Wasn't that uncomfortable given your history?" Olivia finally looked up, meeting my gaze directly. Detective Shernan, navigating uncomfortable situations was the price of being married to Jeffrey. His business relationship with Victor was important to our financial security. I learned to endure discomfort for the greater good. The resignation in her voice spoke volumes about the dynamics of her marriage. "Can you walk me through your movements that evening?" Like the others, Olivia described arriving around 6, having drinks in the living room, then dispersing throughout the house. She had gone to the sunroom adjacent to Victor's study, claiming she wanted to look at the sunset over the garden. "I was alone when I heard the gunshot," she said. "It was very close, just through the wall from where I was sitting. I froze at first, not certain what I'd heard. Then I heard Elise screaming from the hallway. Did you hear anything else before the shot? Voices from the study, perhaps? Any indication that Victor had a visitor?" Olivia shook her head. "No, it was quiet. I was reading a magazine, half dozing in the armchair. If there were voices, I didn't register them. The sunroom and study shared a wall, I noted. Was there a connecting door between them? No. You had to go back to the main hallway to access either room. I pulled out the evidence bag with the key. Do you recognize this?" Olivia examined it, then nodded. "It looks like a key to Victor's study." "Is it important?" "It's the missing spare key. It was recently sent anonymously to the police department." Her eyes widened slightly. "After all this time, who would have had it? That's what I'm trying to determine." "Did you know about the spare key's existence?" "I knew Victor kept spares to all the rooms. He mentioned it once when he was showing Jeffrey and me around the house after a renovation." I made a note, then asked, "How would you describe the relationships between the people in the house that night? Any tensions or conflicts you observed?" Olivia considered this carefully. Everyone had some level of conflict with Victor. That was his nature. He cultivated tension. Catherine and he disagreed about business matters. Daniel resented his father's new marriage and felt displaced. Jeffrey and Victor had a competitive partnership that sometimes turned adversarial. And Elise? A flicker of something dislike perhaps crossed Olivia's face before she masked it. Elise played the devoted wife, but there was a calculation to her that Victor seemed blind to. Or perhaps he saw it and appreciated it as a reflection of himself. Did you stay in contact with any of them after Victor's death? Jeffrey, of course, until our divorce. After that, no. I made a clean break from that life, including any financial benefits. Olivia's smile was small and sad. My divorce settlement was modest. Jeffrey had excellent lawyers, and I wanted out more than I wanted money. I teach art at a community college now. It's enough. One final question, I said. Do you have any theory about how someone could have killed Victor in a locked room and then disappeared? Olivia was silent for a long moment, absently turning her coffee cup in small circles. No, she finally said. It seemed impossible then, and it seems impossible now. But Victor Holloway made a career of accomplishing the impossible, usually at someone else's expense. Perhaps it's fitting that his death would be equally impossible to unravel. As our interview concluded, I was struck by how different Olivia seemed from the others. Where they projected strength, confidence, and control, she emanated a quiet resignation, the demeanor of someone who had survived by adapting rather than dominating. Yet beneath that softness, I sensed a resilience that might have been easily underestimated. Mid-story climax. Walking through the grounds of the Holloway estate on my third visit, I found myself drawn to the garden where Jeffrey claimed to have been when the gunshot rang out. The property was extensive, with carefully maintained formal gardens, giving way to more natural wooded areas near the boundaries. A light rain had begun to fall, casting everything in a gray, misty light that seemed appropriate to the somber nature of my investigation. Something about this case was itching at the back of my mind connections. I couldn't quite make discrepancies too subtle to pin down. Each interview had provided pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a coherent picture. My phone rang, breaking the silence. It was the forensic specialist I'd asked to re-examine the ballistics report from the original investigation, Detective Shernan. I've completed the review you requested, and there's something odd about the bullet trajectory. According to the original report, the bullet entered Victor Holloway's chest at a slight upward angle, suggesting someone shorter than him fired the shot. That matches with what we know, I said. Victor was over 6 feet tall. Most of our suspects would have fired from a lower height. Yes, but here's the issue. The bullet's path through the body doesn't match the position they found him in. If he was standing facing the door, as witnesses reported, the bullet should have exited at a different angle. I stopped walking, suddenly alert. What are you saying? I'm saying either the body was moved after death, or he wasn't facing the direction everyone assumed when he was shot. Could the impact of the bullet have spun him around? Possibly, but the blood spatter pattern doesn't support that theory. There's something off about the entire scene as it was documented. I thanked the specialist and ended the call, my mind racing with new possibilities. If the body had been moved or positioned after death, it changed everything about how we understood the crime scene. As I turned to head back to the house, something caught my eye near the edge of the Gardena small outbuilding, partially obscured by ornamental shrubs. It wasn't on any of the property maps I'd reviewed. Curious, I made my way toward it. The structure turned out to be an old greenhouse, its glass panels dirty and several cracked or missing entirely. The door squeaked as I pushed it open. Inside was abandoned gardening equipment, empty pots, and a thick layer of dust, except for a narrow path that showed signs of more recent foot traffic. Following the path led me to the back of the greenhouse, where a section of flooring had been replaced with newer wood. Kneeling, I found that one board was loose. When I lifted it, I discovered a small compartment beneath and inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a rusted .38 caliber revolver. My heart rate quickened. After 10 years, I was holding what could very well be the murder weapon that had eluded the original investigation. But its presence here raised disturbing new questions. How had it remained hidden during the initial search of the property? And more importantly, who had access to this greenhouse both then and now? As I carefully rewrapped the gun and called for forensic backup, my mind returned to the anonymous letter and key. Someone wanted this case reopened, wanted the truth to finally emerge, but were they seeking justice or playing an elaborate game? Back at the house, waiting for the forensic team to arrive, I decided to examine Victor's study once more. Something the ballistics specialist said had triggered a new line of thought. If Victor wasn't positioned as everyone believed at the time of his death, what did that mean for the locked room mystery? I stood in the center of the study, mentally reconstructing the scene based on crime scene photos and witness statements. Victor's body had been found here, facing the door, a single bullet wound to his chest. The door had been locked from the inside, key still in the lock, windows secure. No secret entrances discovered. But what if? I moved to the large portrait of Victor hanging above the fireplace. Something about it had bothered me during my first visit, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Now, examining it more closely, I noticed slight indentations in the wallpaper around the frame, almost as if the portrait had been regularly moved. Carefully, I lifted the heavy frame away from the wall. Behind it was what appeared to be a solid wall, but when I pressed against it, a section moved slightly, a hidden panel. My pulse quickened as I searched for a release mechanism. Finding a small, nearly invisible latch, I triggered it, and the panel slid sideways to reveal a narrow passage beyond. A secret entrance to the studio that wouldn't be obvious to anyone who didn't know to look for it. Here was the solution to how someone could enter a locked room, commit murder, and vanish without a trace. But as I examined the passage more carefully, I realized it raised as many questions as it answered. The passage was narrow and dusty, clearly unused for years. And it didn't lead outside or to another room as I expected. It connected directly to the sunroom adjacent to the study. The sunroom where Olivia Reynolds claimed to have been sitting alone when the gunshot was fired. As this realization dawned, my phone rang again. It was the lab with preliminary results from the key that had been anonymously sent to the department. Detective, we found partial fingerprints on the key. They're degraded due to age and handling, but we got enough to run through the system. And we got a match, but it's not what we expected. The prints belong to Martha Jensen, the Holloway housekeeper. Martha Jensen, the elderly housekeeper who had provided Elise's alibi, claiming they were together in the kitchen when the shot was fired. According to my research, Martha had died of natural causes 3 years after Victor's murder. The discovery of the hidden passage and the identification of Martha's prints on the key were game changers. Everything I thought I understood about this case was now in question. Someone had deliberately concealed crucial evidence for a decade, and that someone might not be among the obvious suspects I'd been focusing on. As the forensic team arrived to process the greenhouse and the newly discovered passage, I stepped outside for a moment, trying to process these developments. The rain had intensified, running in rivulets down my coat and blurring the landscape around me. In that moment, I felt a presence behind me. Turning quickly, I found Elise standing there, watching me with an unreadable expression. "You found something," she said. It wasn't a question. Several somethings, I confirmed, studying her reaction carefully, including a secret passage behind your late husband's portrait and what appears to be the murder weapon hidden in the old greenhouse. If I expected shock or alarm, I was disappointed. Elise's expression remained composed, though something flickered in her eyes' recognition, perhaps. "I always knew this house had secrets," she said quietly. "Victor loved his little mysteries." "Did you know about the passage?" "No." Her denial seemed genuine, but I'm not entirely surprised. Victor was paranoid about security and privacy. A secret exit from his study would appeal to him. "It connects to the sunroom," I noted, "where Olivia claimed to be sitting when the shot was fired. Does that suggest anything to you?" Elise's gaze sharpened. Are you suggesting Olivia killed my husband? I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm following evidence. She nodded slowly, then said something that caught me completely off guard. You should talk to Martha Jensen's daughter. She lives about 20 miles from here. Martha Jensen is dead. Yes, but her daughter Lillian isn't. And if Martha's fingerprints are on something related to this case, Lillian might know why. I stared at Elise, startled. I didn't mention fingerprints. A small, enigmatic smile crossed her face. You didn't have to, Detective. I've been waiting 10 years for someone to look at this case with fresh eyes. Now that you have, things are finally starting to move. Before I could respond, she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving me standing in the rain with a distinct feeling that the game had suddenly changed and that Elise Holloway Winters had just made a significant move on the chessboard. Unraveling threads. The modest suburban home where Lillian Jensen lived looked nothing like the opulent Holloway estate. It was small but meticulously maintained, with flowering plants lining the walkway and cheerful curtains in the windows. As I approached the front door, I tried to reconcile this cozy setting with the darkening mystery I was investigating. Lillian Jensen was in her early 60s, with her mother's same practical demeanor and observant eyes. She invited me in without surprise, as if she'd been expecting my visit. I've been waiting for someone to come asking about what happened at the Holloway house, she said as she served tea in her small living room. Mom always said the truth would come out eventually. Then your mother knew something about Victor Holloway's death? I asked, accepting the cup she offered. Lillian settled into an armchair across from me. Mom worked for the Holloway family for over 20 years. She saw everything that happened in that house. The arguments, the affairs, the threats. Victor treated her like she was invisible, which meant she witnessed things he never meant anyone to see. Did she witness his murder? Lillian's hands tightened around her teacup. Not exactly, but she knew who did it and how. Why didn't she come forward? She tried in the beginning. She told the detective in charge what she suspected, but he dismissed her. Said she was an old woman confused by shock that her theory was impossible given the locked room. I leaned forward. What was her theory? That Victor Holloway was already dead when everyone heard the gunshot. The statement hung in the air between us, outrageous yet compelling. That's not what the evidence suggested, I said carefully. Isn't it? Mom said the medical examiner placed time of death between 7 and 9 p.m. The gunshot everyone heard was at 8:15. What if the actual murder happened earlier, and what everyone heard was staged? But the body was still warm when they broke down the door, I countered. Yes, because he hadn't been dead long, maybe an hour or so. Just long enough for the killer to establish an alibi elsewhere in the house. It was an audacious theory, but one that might explain the discrepancies in the bullet trajectory. If Victor had been killed earlier and his body positioned afterward. The key that was sent to the police department, I said. It had your mother's fingerprints on it. Lillian nodded. Mom had access to all the keys as housekeeper. She discovered the spare study key was missing the morning after the murder. She thought the killer must have taken it. So how did it end up being mailed to the police department 10 years later? I sent it, Lillian admitted quietly. After Mom died, I found it among her personal effects with a letter explaining what she believed happened that night. She'd kept it all those years, hoping someday someone would listen. I set my tea aside, focusing entirely on Lillian now. Tell me everything your mother wrote in that letter. Lillian rose and went to a small desk in the corner, retrieving an envelope from a drawer. Here, this is her account of what she believed happened. She wrote it down in case something happened to her before the truth came out. I accepted the envelope, a tangible link to a witness who had died still carrying the burden of an unsolved crime. Thank you. This could be crucial to the investigation. There's one more thing, Lillian said. Mom mentioned a greenhouse on the property where Mr. Holloway used to hide things he didn't want his wife to find. Gifts for mistresses, private documents, that sort of thing. She thought the murder weapon might be hidden there. It was, I confirmed. We found it yesterday. Lillian's expression showed both validation and sadness. Then Mom was right about that too. She carried the weight of knowing all this for 3 years before her heart gave out. I hope you can finally bring her some justice. I promised to do my best and left with Martha Jensen's letter a potential roadmap to solving a decade-old murder that had baffled investigators. Back in my office, I spread out all the evidence: Martha's letter, crime scene photos, interview notes, ballistics reports, and property maps of the Holloway estate. I was looking for patterns, connections that might have been missed or deliberately obscured. Martha's letter was remarkably detailed. She described hearing Victor arguing with someone in his study around 7 p.m., not 8:15, when the gunshot was reported. She couldn't identify the voice, but the argument was heated. She'd gone upstairs to prepare the guest rooms and heard what she thought might have been a muffled gunshot, but she wasn't certain. When she came back downstairs around 8, everyone was scattered throughout the house. Elise asked her to help in the kitchen, establishing both their alibis for what would happen next. At 8:15, a loud gunshot echoed through the house, what Martha believed was a second shot, fired to create the illusion that Victor was killed at that moment rather than an hour earlier. It was an ingenious plan. Kill Victor when no one had established alibis, hide the body in the secret passage, then stage a gunshot when everyone had carefully established their locations. Return the body to the study using the secret passage. Lock the door from inside using the spare key, then exit through the passage back to the sunroom, creating the perfect locked room mystery. But who would have known about the secret passage? And who would have had the cold calculation to carry out such an elaborate deception? I turned to the new ballistics report, comparing it with Martha's timeline. If Victor was shot around 7 p.m. while arguing with someone in his study, then positioned differently when discovered after the staged gunshot at 8:15, it would explain the discrepancies in the bullet trajectory. The forensic report on the revolver found in the greenhouse confirmed it was the murder weapon, with traces of gunpowder residue consistent with having been fired years ago. Partial fingerprints on the gun were too degraded for identification, but its caliber matched the bullet that killed Victor. I was building a timeline that made sense of the physical evidence, but I still didn't have the killer's identity. Each suspect had opportunity during that unaccounted hour between 7 and 8 p.m. Each had motive. And now, knowing about the secret passage, each could have staged the locked room scenario. My phone rang the lab again. Detective, we've completed the analysis of the material from the hidden passage. There's something interesting. We found trace evidence of perfume on the wall of the passage, preserved in a spot that would have been brushed against by someone moving through the narrow space. Can you identify it? It's a high-end fragrance called Jardin de Minuit, quite distinctive and expensive. I thanked them and added this new piece to my mental puzzle. An expensive perfume in the secret passage, a feminine clue, in a case that had initially seemed to point toward the male suspects. Pulling out my interview notes, I reviewed what I'd observed about each suspect. Had any of the women been wearing perfume during our meetings? I couldn't recall specifically, but there was a way to find out which of them might favor this particular scent. A call to a luxury department store confirmed what I suspected. Jardin de Minuit was a limited edition fragrance, and their records showed only 3 customers in the area had purchased it in the past decade. One name on that list matched a name in my case file. It wasn't conclusive evidence, but it was another thread pulling me toward a specific suspect. Combined with Martha's letter, the ballistics discrepancy, the hidden weapon, and the secret passage, I was finally seeing a coherent picture emerge from the chaos of conflicting accounts. There was one more person I needed to interview before I could be certain the one person who had been present that night but whom I'd overlooked until now. Final revelations. The nursing home, where I found Martha Jensen's niece, Rebecca, was a pleasant facility with well-kept grounds and attentive staff. At Fort Height, Rebecca had already spent 3 years here, her body ravaged by multiple sclerosis, but her mind sharp and observant. Detective Shernan, she greeted me from her wheelchair by the window of her private room, Aunt Lillian called to say you might visit. You're investigating Mr. Holloway's murder after all this time. Yes, I confirmed, taking the seat she indicated. I understand you were at the Holloway house the night of the murder, though not as a guest. Rebecca nodded. I was helping Aunt Martha that weekend. She was getting older, and the big dinner parties were becoming too much for her to manage alone. I worked in the kitchen mostly, staying out of sight as the help is expected to do, which meant you could observe without being noticed. A small smile crossed her face. Exactly. The wealthy rarely notice the people who cook their food or clean their rooms. We become part of the furniture present, but invisible. What did you observe that night? Rebecca turned her wheelchair slightly to face me more directly. Everything Aunt Martha told you in her letter, I assume. The argument in the study around 7. The possible first gunshot. The way the guests were all establishing their locations throughout the house before the second, louder shot at 8:15. Did you see who Victor was arguing with in the study? No. I was in the kitchen and the study door was closed, but I did see someone leaving the study shortly after the argument ended. They used the main hallway, not realizing I could see from the kitchen doorway. My pulse quickened. Who was it? Elise Holloway, Rebecca said without hesitation. She looked determined, not upset or frightened as you'd expect if they just had a terrible argument. Just focused, like she had a task to complete. Did you tell the original investigators this? They never asked me. They interviewed Aunt Martha briefly, but dismissed her concerns. No one thought to question the temporary kitchen help at all. I made notes, adding this new information to my mental timeline. Did you see anything else unusual that evening? Rebecca considered this. Around 8, just before the staged gunshot, I saw Olivia Winters coming from the direction of the sunroom. She seemed nervous, kept looking over her shoulder. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Later, when I learned where everyone claimed to be when the shot was fired, it seemed significant. Because Olivia claimed to have been in the sunroom when the gunshot was heard at 8:15. Exactly. But she wasn't there at 8. She may have returned before the shot, but she definitely left at some point. I thought about the secret passage connecting the study to the sunroom and the trace of expensive perfume found there. The pieces were aligning, but not in the way I'd initially expected. One last question, I said. Did you ever notice if either Elise or Olivia wore a distinctive perfume? Rebecca's expression changed subtly. Yes, Olivia always wore the same scent, something French and expensive. I remember because Aunt Martha once commented that it was the same perfume Catherine Voss wore. Apparently, Victor had bought it for both of them at different times. Did you know the name of it? I believe Aunt Martha called it Midnight Garden or something similar, translated from French. Jardin de Minuit, Garden of Midnight. Another connection confirmed. I thanked Rebecca for her time and insights, promising to keep her informed about the investigation's progress. As I left the nursing home, I knew I had enough now to confront my primary suspect, but I also suspected I didn't have the complete picture yet. There were still threads that didn't quite connect. I arranged to meet Olivia Reynolds at the Holloway estate rather than the coffee shop where we'd first talked. She seemed surprised by the request, but agreed, arriving at the specified time looking nervous but resigned. Why did you want to meet here? She asked, as I led her through the house toward Victor's study. Because this is where the truth began and ended, I replied. And I think it's time we both acknowledged what really happened 10 years ago. Inside the study, I'd set up the evidence, crime scene photos, ballistics reports, Martha's letter, and the murder weapon in its evidence bag. Olivia's eyes fixed on the gun, her composure visibly shaken. You found it, she whispered. In the greenhouse, I confirmed, along with a great deal of other evidence that tells a very different story than the one presented to investigators 10 years ago. I gestured for her to sit, then laid out what I had pieced together. The argument between Victor and someone in his study around 7 p.m., the likely first gunshot that few noticed, the repositioning of the body, and the staged second gunshot at 8:15 when everyone had established alibis. The secret passage behind the portrait connects this room to the sunroom where you claimed to be sitting when the staged gunshot was fired, I concluded. We found traces of your perfume, Jardin de Minuit, in that passage. Olivia's hands trembled in her lap. You can't prove any of this. Rebecca Jensen saw you leaving the sunroom around 8 p.m., shortly before the staged gunshot. Martha Jensen heard the argument, and what she believed was the first muffled gunshot. The ballistics reports confirm that Victor's body was moved after death, and your perfume places you in a secret passage that you claimed not to know existed. Tears began to spill down Olivia's cheeks, but she remained silent. What I don't understand, I continued, my tone softening slightly, is why you protected her all these years. Why take the risk of being connected to the murder when you could have come forward with what you knew? Olivia looked up, confusion evident through her tears. Protected who? Now it was my turn to be confused. Elise Holloway. Rebecca Jensen saw her leaving Victor's study after the argument around 7 p.m. The evidence suggests she killed him during that confrontation, then enlisted your help to stage the locked room scenario using the secret passage you could access from the sunroom. Olivia's laugh was almost hysterical. Is that what you think happened? That Elise and I conspired together? She shook her head, wiping tears from her cheeks. Detective, you've connected many of the pieces, but you've completely misunderstood the picture they form. Enlighten me then. Olivia took a deep breath, seeming to make a decision. I did know about the secret passage. Victor showed it to me years earlier during our involvement. It was his private escape route, a way to move through the house unseen when he wanted to visit my room without Jeffrey's knowledge. She stood, moving to the portrait and touching its frame lightly. When our affair ended, he thought it was amusing that I knew his secreta private joke between us that I never told anyone about. I think he enjoyed having shared confidences with me that Jeffrey wasn't privy to. So, what happened that night? Victor asked me to meet him in his study before dinner. He said he had something important to tell me. Her voice hardened. What he actually wanted was to resume our affair. He'd become bored with Elise and thought I would welcome his renewed attention. But you didn't. No, I rejected him firmly. He became angry, then threatening. He said he would tell Jeffrey everything about our past relationship, destroy our marriage, ruin me financially. He was used to getting what he wanted and couldn't accept my refusal. And then, Olivia turned back to face me, her expression a complex mixture of regret and defiance. We struggled. He had been drinking. He tried to force himself on me, and I pushed him away. He fell against his desk, and when he straightened up, he had a gun in his hand, the gun he kept in his desk drawer. Her voice became distant, as if she were watching the scene unfold again before her eyes. He pointed it at me, said if he couldn't have me, he'd make sure no one else would want me. I lunged for the gun. We struggled again. It discharged during the struggle, and he fell. You shot him in self-defense, I said quietly. It was an accident, she insisted. The gun went off while we were both holding it. But who would believe that? Victor was a respected businessman. I was the wife of his partner with a history of having an affair with him. It would have looked like a rejected lover's revenge. So you staged the locked room mystery. She nodded slowly. I panicked. I knew about the secret passage. I dragged his body partly into it to hide it temporarily. I took the spare key from his desk where he always kept it. I cleaned up as best I could, then went to the sunroom to establish my presence there. And the staged gunshot at 8:15? I slipped back through the passage around 8, positioned his body in front of the desk, and fired a second shot into the ceiling using a pillow to muffle the sound somewhat, but still make it audible throughout the house. Then I locked the study door from the inside, left through the passage back to the sunroom, and pretended to be as shocked as everyone else when the commotion started. It was an incredible confession, aligning perfectly with the physical evidence while completely changing the narrative I had constructed. But Rebecca Jensen saw Elise leaving Victor's study after your argument, not you. Olivia looked confused. That's impossible. Elise was nowhere near the study at that time. She was upstairs changing for dinner. A new possibility began forming in my mind. What were you wearing that evening? A navy blue dress. Why? And Elise? She was wearing something similar, actually. We'd made an awkward joke about it when we arrived how we'd both chosen navy for the occasion. Similar dresses. From a distance, in the dimly lit hallway, Rebecca Jensen might easily have mistaken Olivia for Elise. A case of mistaken identity that had led me down the wrong path. The gun, I said. You hid it in the greenhouse? Olivia nodded. It was Victor's gun. I took it with me through the passage, wiped it down, and hid it the next day when everyone was busy with the police. I knew about the greenhouse because Victor had shown me his hiding places during our affair. He was quite proud of his little secrets. And the spare key? How did Martha Jensen end up with it? I didn't know what to do with it after using it to lock the study door. I was afraid to keep it, afraid to dispose of it. In my panic, I slipped it into Martha's cleaning supplies the next day, I thought. I thought it would just disappear into the household items. The final piece clicked into place. Martha had found the key, recognized its significance, and kept it all these years as evidence of what she suspected, only to have it returned to the investigation after her death by her well-meaning daughter. Why confess now? I asked. You've maintained your innocence for 10 years. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes again. Because I'm tired, detective. Tired of carrying this secret. Tired of the nightmares. When I heard the case was being reopened, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth emerged. I've spent 10 years looking over my shoulder, waiting for this moment. I considered her confession, weighing it against the evidence and my own moral compass. Olivia Reynolds had killed a man and elaborately covered it up, but she had also been a victim of his predatory behavior, acting in what appeared to be self-defense during a physical struggle. I'll have to take you in, I said finally. Your statement will need to be formalized, but given the circumstances and the evidence of self-defense, the district attorney may view this case with leniency. Olivia nodded, a strange relief washing over her features. I understand. I'm ready to face whatever comes next. Living with this has been its own form of prison. As I escorted her from the room that had held its secrets for a decade, I reflected on the twisted path that had led to this moment. A case of domestic violence, a desperate act of self-preservation, an elaborate deception born of fear rather than maliciant at the center, a man whose manipulation and cruelty had set everything in motion. The locked room mystery was solved, but the moral complexities remained. In my years as a detective specializing in cold cases, I had learned that justice and moral clarity rarely aligned perfectly. Sometimes the most we could hope for was truth, however messy and uncomfortable it might be. Conclusion and moral reflection. The district attorney ultimately decided to charge Olivia Reynolds with manslaughter rather than murder, acknowledging the evidence of self-defense while not completely exonerating her for the elaborate cover-up that followed. Given the extenuating circumstances and the decade that had passed, she accepted a plea deal that included probation and community service, but no prison time. When the news broke, reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had finally been served for Victor Holloway. Others believed Olivia had been punished enough by the years of living in fear and guilt. The case sparked renewed conversations about domestic violence, power dynamics, and how the justice system treats victims who fight back against their abusers. For me, closing the Holloway case brought professional satisfaction, but also profound moral questions that lingered long after the paperwork was filed. Standing at my office window on a rainy evening, much like the one when this investigation began, I find myself reflecting on what this case has taught me about human nature and the elusive concept of justice. You know, I've spent nearly 3 decades looking for truth in the darkest corners of human experience. I've seen how secrets can infect lives like a slow-acting poison, how fear can drive ordinary people to extraordinary deceptions. The Holloway case epitomizes all of these elements of human frailty and resilience. If you're watching this now, ask yourself, what would you have done in Olivia's position? Faced with a powerful man threatening your life and future, caught in a moment of violent struggle, and then confronted with the aftermath of his death, would you have made different choices? It's easy to judge from a distance, but when survival instincts take over, moral clarity often becomes the first casualty. The locked room, that seemingly impossible crime scene, was ultimately just a physical manifestation of the psychological trap Olivia found herself in. No visible way out, no easy escape from the consequences of what happened within those walls. Her elaborate deception wasn't just about evading legal justice. It was about trying to create an alternative reality where she could continue to exist without being defined solely by that one terrible moment. There's a broader lesson here for all of us. We create our own locked rooms when we allow secrets and fears to wall us off from truth and connection. Olivia's decade of silent suffering wasn't freedom, it was another form of imprisonment. It was only when she finally faced the truth that she found a measure of peace, however bittersweet. Justice is rarely perfect. In this case, did justice mean punishing Olivia for a death that occurred during a violent struggle she didn't initiate? Or did justice mean recognizing that she had already served a 10-year sentence of her own making, living every day with the weight of what she'd done? There are no easy answers, but perhaps that's the point. The cases that haunt use both detectives and ordinary citizens alike here are the ones that force us to confront the gray areas of morality, the complicated tangle of human motivation and action. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this case, it's this. Secrets don't protect us, they isolate us. Truth, however painful, is the only path to genuine freedom. Olivia Reynolds learned this lesson at tremendous cost. Perhaps her story can spare others the same journey. For those of you facing your own locked room situations that seem impossible to escape, remember that there are always alternatives to deception and isolation. Reach out. Seek help. The truth may be difficult, but carrying a lie is ultimately more destructive to your spirit and your future. And for those who, like Victor Holloway, use power to manipulate and control others, know that eventually the truth finds its way into the light. No locked room can contain it forever. If you found value in this story, please share it with those you care about. Not just for the entertainment of a complex mystery solved, but for the deeper lessons it contains about human nature, choices, and consequences. And if you'd like to see more investigations like this one, subscribe to the Shernin channel and let me know in the comments what aspects of this case resonated most with you. Until next time, this is Detective Shernin reminding you that even the coldest cases can thaw under persistent investigation, and that the most important mysteries we solve are often the ones that help us understand ourselves. The screen fades to black as rain continues to patter against the window, leaving viewers with the haunting image of the locked study where a decade of secrets finally found release.